Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co host, Nathan Rittenhouse. In this podcast, Cameron and I discuss how Christian apologists and Christians in general should think about the category of doubt. Is faith really the opposite of doubt? We don't think so. See if you are convinced by our argument. And if you find this content helpful, be sure to share it with people who you think would also benefit from it. And if you want to continue to support our pitter-pattering around the world and engaging in the world of Christian apologetics, you can do so by visiting toltogether.com to find more of our resources or to donate.
I have been performing a bizarre social experiment I got on TikTok and have been posting apologetics content. So what am I doing? Am I trying to become a TikTok dancer or TikTok influencer?
Oh, there you go.
No.
Dancing apologetics. Yeah.
I've been really interested in I'm always interested in what people are saying. I'm always interested in the chatter. Think about those people in Acts 17 who used to go to the Areopagus just to see or hear something new. So there are definitely parameters you want to set up with an app that is maximally addictive. But I've been talking about apologetics on TikTok. It's like kicking a hornet's nest, which is interesting. So it's sort of like a tame version of Speaker's Corner, which is that in London, Nathan?
I
Speaker's
think so.
Corner?
Yeah.
Yes. So lots of no new arguments that I've encountered so far. But and in fact, nothing new. Kind of a little bit of a jeering tone. Sometimes people will use phrases like, "You need Sky Daddy to make you feel better," and all of that. But again, that's nothing new. And I mean, social media just takes away some of those social inhibitions. So that's to be expected. But here's what I want to talk to you about today, Nathan, because one area where there's still a great deal of confusion concerns the nature of doubt. And I think this is a very important cornerstone of modern thinking. So I think it would be helpful for us to explore it a little bit. So the hornet's nest was kicked by me, not because I posted anything about the Christian sexual ethic. I mean, if I had done that, I probably would have had people hammering on my door, been doxxed or something like that. Kind of kidding, but only kind of. That's not what I said, though. I didn't go after some massive hot button issue. I said every doubt rests on a prior assumption. And essentially, I'm quoting Leslie Newbigin. He makes this point
Mhm.
at fairly great length in his book, The Gospel in a Pluralist Society, and he himself is drawing from the great Hungarian philosopher and chemist Michael Polanyi. But you can't call anything to question unless, in order to do so, you are resting on a prior assumption. So in other words, even if you're a person who believes that you're a self-identifying skeptic, you're very skeptical of claims about the existence of God, for instance, you still have fundamental commitments. You have, dare I say it, faith. So now I didn't use the F word, faith, in this particular post, but I did say doubt has to rest on a prior assumption. And then I went on to say, I'll just tell you a little bit more about what I said, and then we can start chatting about this, Nathan. But I also said I talked about a story, and I've mentioned it, I think, on this podcast before, when I was at on a university campus, and I was in a public dialogue with two skeptics, both of whom self-identified as atheists, actually. So they went one further. They didn't say agnostic. They didn't say skeptical. They said atheist. And one of them said, "You believe in God. You believe God made humanity. You believe God made you, everything around us, the universe. So therefore, the entire burden of proof is on you." And I said, "Well, hold on a second. Yes, it's true. I believe in God. I believe the universe and humanity were made by a supremely rational, relational, good being. So on my view, it makes sense that the universe is comprehensible and that it's knowable. It makes sense that the natural sciences work. It makes sense that we can trust our reasoning capacities, and morality makes sense. Beauty makes sense. On your view, however, all of that becomes a whole lot more problematic, because if everything is a byproduct of random unguided forces or some vast cosmic accident, then why is it that science works, or that we can know the universe, or that we can trust our minds?" And so the response on TikTok from many people was, "No, no, 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 no. You're the one claiming faith. So you have to provide us with all of the proof. we stand on a baseline of doubt. I had one person literally say, "My baseline is doubt." So let me leave it there for a second, Nathan, because I think plenty of people would be in sympathy with a remark like that, even though I think it's profoundly misguided and wrong. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, let me throw out a kind of a silly little word picture here for us to get going. So I have a beard, and this runs me into interesting conversations. There's some parts of the country beards are okay, some parts it's not. Back and forth. And I recognize there are men that don't grow beards, but by and often the funny way
Hey,
this
so who could
comes
imagine
up.
such men?
I
Just
know
kidding.
the yeah, Cameron. The but the so people would say to me, "Well, why do you have a beard?" Actually, the burden of proof is not on a man with a beard. It's why do you shave your beard? Is the and I'm not making this about beards. I'm just saying it's interesting that culturally, in some parts of the country, having the beard is seen as abnormal when if you're part of the culture where men grow hair on their face is the most normal thing. You
Mm,
see the distinction I'm making here? Like culturally, we've assumed that shaving your facial hair is the normal thing, but
mhm.
and so that is happening here too, Cameron, where historically, if you look at the concept of belief in God, that is the normal default position. That is not the group of people who has to prove
Right.
the assumption. And so let's recognize that when somebody's saying some things about a modern secular version of doubt, you're only saying that because you've been culturally coached to do it, but that is not the normal default position of humanity when it comes to believing that there is something rather than nothing that generated everything. Now, there's conversation about the differences within what that gods are like. Sure, fine, but the default position for humanity, the natural condition, is that if you're a Christian, you're not the one in the like. You're not the one having
Yep.
the abnormal cultural conception of reality based on the history of humanity.
So I want to say a few words about why you can't make doubt the basis of your thought, and then I want to consider a little bit of the legacy of why it would be the case that an important default assumption in the West is that doubt is kind of the cornerstone of an intellectual life.
Mhm.
So I think we'll deal with the history second. We usually, on thinking out loud, we usually reverse that order and start with the kind of we do an intellectual genealogy first. But right now, I just want to see if I can offer you a persuasive case for why doubt cannot be the cornerstone of your thought. So let's just take a very basic scenario and apply it to what I said in this argument regarding the existence of God. Let's think in those terms. So you may say, well, to assume that I mean the assumption that the world was created by God, that humanity was created by God is ridiculous and completely unnecessary. Now I could rule it out. So I doubt it. So you're doubting on the basis of the inherent ridiculousness. Now, and I don't want to straw man this, so I'll add, let's add some a little bit more heft and force to this and say, look, with the advance of, I have no axe to grind, so I'm not Professor Richard Dawkins or the late Christopher Hitchens or one of the four horsemen of the new atheism. I just think God is an unnecessary hypothesis. Now we have adequate scientific explanations for the universe around us, and true, we don't know everything, but we're piecing it together, and we'll get there one day. And also, by the way, the world is filled with heinous, wicked, awful acts, not just suffering, but I mean torture and murder and all sorts and the natural disasters that destroy people's lives and homes. So all of this makes God exceedingly unlikely. Okay. So, and by the way, those are the two real strong cases that actual arguments against God that atheism will make. The apparent ability of the natural sciences to offer an exhaustive explanation of reality and evil. So so you say, here's where my doubts arise. Okay, but you're still making some really important assumptions here. And in my experience, this is where skeptics are very hesitant to admit this, to open up about this. So you're assuming, for instance, that the natural sciences work. You're assuming that the universe is legible. And you're assuming that the human mind is trustworthy, that you can actually that it gives you reliable information. You have to make those assumptions if you're going to do science at all. Well, none of those are actually self-evident in and of themselves. Now, they're powerful assumptions, but they are just that, assumptions. And if, again, if there is no higher power, there's no creator whatsoever, if everything it did come about by random unguided forces, we see what an act of faith it takes to affirm these kinds of assumptions. And the other one runs us into some issues as well, evil. So we can only call something evil in the full metaphysical sense of that word if we're assuming some sort of moral framework. Now, there are plenty of consistent, well, not plenty. There's a select few highly consistent skeptics and atheists who would say there is no such thing as objective morality. I would guess, Nathan, that that's a small group, but we've both talked with people who make that claim, who say no, there's no such thing as objective morality. So, but most people, again, down the ages, the testimony of the human race down the ages is definitely against you. Now, does that mean it's absolutely not true? No, but it's a powerful clue. If the entire human race down the ages felt otherwise, that's a powerful clue. Yeah, Nathan.
Well, let me here's why it's hard for me to get worked up about this, um, as a Christian, and it's this: I don't understand what the atheistic angst is against religion, because let's say, Cameron, that I believed that whatever naturalistic explanation I wanna have for the formation of the instigation of the creation of our universe and then of our planet and then of our world, and that everything is random chance, natural selection, unguided process, the whole 9 yards. That would mean that modern Christianity and religious faith and belief in general are an evolutionarily adapted change for the benefit of humanity. So
Mhm.
you're affirming the fact that a belief in God is a byproduct of an evolutionary process that the vast majority of humans around the world have engaged in. And so it's sort of like, to me, to be an atheist and to be mad at religion is sort of like being mad at eyebrows.
Right.
There's a sense of like, this is the way that the world has evolved. Why are you angry with the byproduct of your own mechanism that you delight in?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's almost like it's adding a supernatural explanation to the origin of religion in addition to our naturalism. But if you want to take and say everything is naturalistically derived and developed, then religion itself has to fit within that framework. And so
Mhm.
that's, for me, a you're y- help me out there. Like,
Yeah.
it seems like I would have to, if I was going to do that consistently, I would have to say, like, yeah, this is just, yeah, part of the evolutionary process, and some
Mhm.
ideas will flourish, and some lead to stability, and some lead to the replication of um, our genes, and some don't. And this
Well,
is
I think
one that has had a
yep.
massive influence on the development of humanity.
Yes, and there are, so in a sense, it's inconsistent then to attack religion with such force and ferocity. I think of Sigmund Freud, who talked about in Civilization and its Discontents that religion is basically, so it's a mass hallucination and delusion, so it's basically a form of collective insanity. So that
But
might
also,
sound
that's
real
sort of like the insanity of saying your life has objective value.
right, and which, for the record, Freud believed that thinking in those terms was to succumb to a delusion. There's a remarkable exchange in a correspondence he had with another psychologist. They were discussing, this psychologist was discussing a patient, female patient, struggling with finding meaning and purpose in her life. Sounds familiar. So, sounds like somebody in our culture today, right? And Freud's counsel was, yeah, if your patient, and I'm paraphrasing, but if your patient is concerned about meaning, then your patient, ultimate your intrinsic meaning, your patient is basically delusional. You've got to bring, because there is no intrinsic meaning to life. You've got to strip away that illusion and then to face the true condition of humanity. So in other words, that your patient wants some sort of final consolation or hope, and such hope doesn't exist. This, incidentally, is why so many of Freud's disciples, well, I think probably all of them, from Adler to Otto Rank, broke ranks with him, betrayed him intellectually as he saw it, because they wanted to actually help their patients in the sense of offer them some kind of hope. But Freud, to his credit, recognized that to do so would be to go in a quasi-religious direction, and he was absolutely unwilling to do that. But interestingly enough, that same kind of, can we call it noble intellectual hypocrisy, exists in the field of psychiatry today and psychology. It's a very atheistic field, but plenty of psychologists and psychiatrists, even though they might be atheists, will recommend religion because it helps people find meaning in life. And so they'll take a purely kind of functional utilitarian approach to it. Jonathan Haidt, whom we quote a lot, I'd say he does this. He's a social psychologist, talks about the social value and utility of religion. But so yeah, that there are a number of interesting responses to religion. That there's the outright hostility, there's the, oh well, we recognize its social utility and usefulness, and then there may be some who are a little bit more, probably the most consistent attitude toward it, Nathan, would be somebody who's totally no axe to grind on it whatsoever, and just views it as false and evolutionary adaptation. But to back up a second, the point that I'm making is these are commitments. These are fundamental assumptions. So, and these are the assumptions supporting the doubt. And so let's look at some of these assumptions real quickly. These are, in this case, we're talking about somebody who's an atheist or a skeptic. The assumptions supporting the doubt in the existence of God usually are the natural sciences, which again, you have to assume the universe is knowable. You have to assume our minds are trustworthy. You have to assume that in order for science to work. You have to assume reasoning works. You have to, abstract reasoning works, mathematics works. And then you also have to assume, as many go one further and assume, that there is an actual moral framework to the universe. That's why we can say something is right or wrong, and that's why how we declare something is evil. So these are assumptions, but then also add to this the assumption that somehow everything came about from nothing. So you'll hear, yeah.
Um,
So I'll pause there. Yeah,
Here's a distinction I want to make, that you'll see happening, and your earlier comments pointed this out, is that we have the natural sciences and then we have evil, and you kind of set those up as the two main foundations of doubt. And be that as it may, I would like to point out that those are two different categories of doubt.
for sure.
The Bible, by and large, does not give any formal proof, nor does it think that it is an article of faith to believe that God exists. The existence of God is not a category of faith, biblically speaking. I mean, you get all the way even up to like, oh, you believe there's a God, that's cute. Even the demons do. Like, you get no bonus points for thinking, believing, or knowing there's a God. Scripture is primarily concerned with what is God like, and to say belief in God is a statement of the knowledge of God's character, not of God's existence. And this is a slippery thing that I see happening sometimes in the doubt conversation, where people will jump back and forth between categories of existence and character. So if you can
Hmm.
say, well, I can't believe, so when it comes to evil, somebody will say, well, I can't believe in a God who would allow this to exist. That is a weird equivalence to think that whether or not you like the moral framework of a being has any bearing on whether or not it exists. Because it is
Hmm.
totally logically possible that you despise God and he is real. I mean, all the ancient religions had gods who weren't trying to be good, and people were sacrificing their children to them. So it
Hmm.
wasn't there wasn't this connection between character and existence. It'd be like saying, I don't like the president, therefore he doesn't exist. And
Hmm.
when people say stuff like that, you're just like, That's dumb." Like, that's not how, like, reality doesn't conform to your wishes in that way. And so I I recognize that that is logically inconsistent and that not everybody makes that argument, but it's a big chunk of the
Yeah.
conversation that I hear for sure is that people are acting as if the thing that they dislike doesn't exist. And that's logically nonsensical as well.
So let's just be honest and name some of the assumptions that happen here. And then we can talk about how we got here a little bit of the history here. So many people who would self-identify as skeptics, the more you push the argument, the more you realize that they are harboring a categorical opposition or a categorical denial of anything supernatural of any kind. So now there is a sense in which this now has in our culture a distinguished intellectual pedigree in certain rarefied circles. That's a statement that has to be carefully qualified, and I'll say why in a second. But just to point out, that is a powerful assumption. There is no such thing as the supernatural, and indeed the supernatural cannot exist.
God
So,
does not exist because I say so.
essentially, so this is what stating it in these kind of bare bones terms is helpful because it showcases the flimsiness. It showcases that this is on the face of it just a naked assertion, and it's a faith statement. So I'll use the F word now. It is a faith statement. Faith in the sense that it requires real commitment. It's based on faith is something common to every human being. It's not just restricted to religious expressions, and there are healthy expressions of it and there are unhealthy expressions of it. But in its base, the basic parts of faith are it's a combination of beliefs, knowledge, and trust.
Loyalty you
And
could throw in there also.
yeah, loyalty. So, and the question is whether this is being done well or whether it's misguided in its expression. So, but to give you one example, you might find that if you're in a conversation with somebody and they say, "Oh, come on, there's not one shred of evidence for the existence of God." I still hear this all the time. It's hysterical that people say this out loud, but they do. And that's not I'm not saying it's hysterical that people are atheists. I'm saying that informed atheists, an informed atheist who's well-read would never say something like that. There is there's a ton of evidence for the existence of God that's recognized as legitimate. It's debatable, of course,
Hmm.
but there's a ton of evidence. And to say that is not it's even beyond dismissive, it's just silly. But people will say it. So you might counter and say, well, let's to take one of the classic Thomas Aquinas's 5 ways, look at the design of the universe. We see clear we see beauty, majesty, intricacy. The person may say this was said to me actually just yesterday. No, 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 don't say intricacy. Intricacy is just another way of saying complexity. And that's just another way of you just saying, "Oh, just because it's really complex, that means somebody must have made it." That's a huge leap. Well,
Mm.
notice that in any other category of life, we don't see that as a huge leap. We see that as basic common sense. You see a gorgeous painting, for instance. You're going to assume somebody painted it. And there's no huge leap in that. So why would the world, why would nature, why would the natural order be any different? No, 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 no. That can't be because there's a great huge divide between nature and the things we make. Why? There is if you have a categorical commitment to there not being anything supernatural or any supernatural cause.
Yeah. Okay. So hang on. But again, you're making the distinction of saying that humans aren't natural.
Right.
So it's what do you want to do with that? I mean, so it's can while you're thinking here a second, Cameron, can I throw in a word for doubt in a positive way?
Yeah.
Because scripture is not, and particularly when you look at the teachings of Jesus, Jesus is not anti-doubt. And in fact, there are times in the New Testament where the word for doubt and to judge and to decide are the same word. It's just translated differently in context. There are times when Jesus is frustrated with people's inability to discern or to judge between two things. And he gets frustrated that they can't make the decision at looking. And that's a form of doubt that judging between deciding between two things. And we have to have a certain amount of doubt that's operative in our lives, just not to be total dupes and everything, you know? So you get the phone call about your car's extended warranty, you get the email saying that your Amazon package is delayed and you need to update your credit card information. I mean, the world is
Yep.
full of scams. And so we do need to have a very healthy sense of, yeah, that's not right. I doubt it. Should be your natural response to 99% of the advertising that you see in a given day. So I'm sympathetic to the person who is naturally skeptical about the claims of Christianity by and large because most truth claims that we encounter on a day to day basis are manipulative, they're scams, they are not pursuing the truth, they are not good for us, they're going to help somebody make money off of us being gullible or shallow minded or manipulating our desires to try to deceive us. So doubt is a good thing to say, I have commitments to something else that protects me against just believing anything. And back to the Newbigin Polanyi thing, I think this is really, really important as we start thinking about how might we want to structure and order our lives. That if you come to me, Cameron, and say, I believe the moon is made of cheese, and I say, I doubt it, that doubt is not coming just from a posture of like, that's the socially acceptable thing to be skeptical. It's that I have fundamental alternative beliefs about what the moon is made
Mhm.
out of. And so I say, I doubt it in light of that. And I think this is the challenge going forward is to say that Christians are people who are rejecting the vast majority of information that is chucked at them because they believe something else is true about the universe, the world, God, love, human interaction, legitimate hope, and a possible future. And so we, as Christians, we are rejecting more things, I think,
Mhm.
than anybody else in order to say, no, we're staking our claims on this and we're using this set of principles and understandings in order to move forward. And so it's not like the atheists are more skeptical or more or better at doubting. We doubt in the equal measures. It's just we doubt and defend our core commitments and where we, drive our tent stakes along the way. So what Cameron is trying to help us illustrate here is that you're putting a stake in the ground somewhere. And if you're a Christian, you are highly skeptical about a whole wide swath of other religious claims or non-religious claims for that matter. And if you're an atheist, you are staking a claim and a certain vision of reality and you're skeptical about all the rest of them. So the faith, belief, doubts language hurled as an insult doesn't really constructively produce meaningful change or livable results if we're not aware of exactly what it is that we're doing when we use these words.
Yes, and I mentioned earlier certain rarefied circles where this is the default assumption. So let me say a few words about that real quickly just to put this into proper context. So, I mean mainly university settings and some of our elite, our educated cultural institutes. If you think about all of those are prevailingly secular these days, in the West at least. But so that's the dominant, that's the script in those places. Yes, it is. And it's the dominant narrative. It's the I like I think Charles Taylor's way of pointing this, well, illustrating this is as a people see it as a subtraction story. You know, you finally we outgrow faith and religious prejudice. We remove all of that, and what is left is secularism or naturalism, that kind of thing. But that's a very small group of people, and that's a I mean, so by far the majority position. Now, again, this does not necessarily mean it's true. I'm not saying this is some sort of knock 'em out, drag 'em out argument. I'm just saying the testimony of humanity down the ages to the present day is that there's more to life than meets the eye, and that there's a god or gods. I mean, the globe is overwhelmingly religious. So,
Can I jump in right here real quick on
yeah,
that?
please do.
Because what that whole thing that you were pushing back when you're about intricacies, complexities, you're
Mhm.
delighting in the things you don't know. The history of religious belief, particularly in the Christian tradition, is that we believe in God based on the things that we do know, not on the things that we don't know. And so there's that old like God of the gaps. You don't understand something,
Sure.
you just posit God and it goes in the intellectual gap that's in. That's not actually how that works. It's that the more we understand things scientifically, the more mystique and beauty and complexity that we see doesn't make God less likely to be a cause behind it. It works the other way. It's in light of what I do know that I believe that there's a God, not in light of what I don't know. So I believe in the God of the given, not the God of the gaps. And
Very well
like
said.
that
Yeah.
is a difficult, and people are going to say, Nathan, you're doing this thing where you're wanting to have your cake and eat it too. And I would say, no, I want to have my cake and know the baker. And to me, those are not intellectually incompatible positions to think about causality, agency, uh, and beauty. So there is a sense in which I think it's important to continue to have this conversation, Cameron, because we need to be very clear that what we mean by the words doubt and faith are very different than the way that they're used by
Yeah.
a certain percentage of Christians, for sure, but then also by a secular accusation. I mean, it hasn't been that long ago that Merriam-Webster changed the definition of faith to mean believing in something without evidence, which is, Richard Dawkins 101.
Mhm.
But let's be clear, that's Richard Dawkins' definition of faith. That is not the biblical definition of faith. And so not all faith is faith and not all doubt is doubt. And it's important that you're doing some good work here, Cameron, in helping us think through. Let's be clear on what it is we want to defend, and let's be realistic about the things we want to deny.
Well, I want to use a phrase here that will raise many eyebrows, but it's a good one. This comes from a thinker I'm going to guess many of our listeners won't be as familiar with, just because he's doesn't get the kind of credit that he deserves, and he's often very misunderstood. He's a very rich thinker. His name's Hans Georg Gadamer. So there's a good German name for you, Gadamer. And
I would love for
his
somebody to write in to info@toltogether.com if you have ever heard that name before. Just
Yeah, no, well, I'm
okay.
confident if you have, and I'm not insulting your intelligence or your education level. I'm just saying this guy's he's pretty obscure. He
I'm
doesn't
just
get a lot of
you
credit.
have a penchant of saying, "Well, the well-known French philosopher," and then quoting somebody nobody's ever heard of, and that's why we like
Yeah,
you.
well,
So, thanks. Carry on.
so my claim to fame here is I'm Stuart McAllister's son. So therefore, if it was written, I probably have heard of it because of my dad. And that title's no exception. But his masterpiece. He really only wrote one very important, large, challenging book called Truth and Method, which very misunderstood. Some people accuse it of being relativist. It's not. But one phrase he uses in there is good prejudice. So he's not talking about some knockdown argument. He's talking about good prejudice in the sense that if you have what has been established as a very rich conversation that's been carried on down the ages that provides a powerful clue to the nature of reality or the nature of human relationships, human interactions. Well, you could put the assumption that there is some kind of a higher power or God or gods in this category. There's a good prejudice there in the sense that this has been the overwhelming consensus and remains the overwhelming consensus all along, and it is something that people tend to come to that conclusion very almost naturally. They've done studies on this as well. So I am bringing that up not to be especially controversial. Here's my controversial point in our world right now, it is presented to you as believers. I'm speaking to the Christians right now that if you believe in God, then you're the alien. You're the odd person out, and you need to be permanently on the back foot, always on the defensive, and that it's your job to justify God's existence and explain everything. I am here to tell you, many people think that, so that notion carries cultural currency, but it is not true. The entire burden of proof is not on you. Now, I'm an apologist, and so is Nathan. I think we should be gracious. We offer defenses when we need to. Let's make no mistake about it. God doesn't need our defense. He's perfectly fine without our feeble little arguments. We could do this as an act of love for our neighbor, but your skeptical interlocutor has commitments and assumptions of his or her own. They're often very unwilling to be explicit about those because then that will make them vulnerable too. Then they're going to see that they have commitments. No, no, no. I'm just the questioner. I ask questions. You're the one making these big claims. Actually, the skeptic is making big claims as well. All right. So the the notion that doubt is the cornerstone of everything comes to us from the Enlightenment. And I mean, essentially, the key phrase here, and this is all I'll say about this, but the key phrase here was Immanuel Kant saying, another German, gosh, keep bringing in these German philosophers, dare to know. So in other words, grow up, be mature, strip off all the prejudice of religious assumptions, all of these kind of assumptions that have shackled your mind, and dare to just face reality as it is and call into question all of these empty traditions. Now, the irony there is, of course, that the Enlightenment is itself an intellectual tradition that has assumptions of its own. It's big, the big, huge assumption of the Enlightenment, by the way, I'll spare you a lot of ink and a lot of searching and a lot of books, is that reason is the final arbiter of everything and that man is at the center of the universe, of humanity. And that's a beautiful story. It's an interesting story. It's a fun story. We're rational men and women in control of our destiny. I mean, that holds massive appeal and massive sway. I happen to be highly skeptical of it because I don't find it very convincing at all. So again, just to bring up Nathan's point again, we as Christians, of course, doubt is an important skill in life. We all exercise it. We just sometimes use it in different ways. So those of us committed to Christ will call into question the subtraction story. We will call into question the enlightenment, veneration of reason above everything else. All we need to do is look into the history books. All we need to do is look right now at the news and see the folly of human beings. And yes, even the most brilliant, innovative, geniuses out there are also leading many times, I'm not naming names, you can think of somebody, ruinous lives and ruining many other lives. They're in moral shambles. They may be intellectually brilliant, but there's no necessary correlation between a sky high IQ and moral behavior. All of this points in a direction that says humanity cannot save itself. We need help from the outside, which has been also an assumption down the ages where there's a lot of good prejudice. Nathan, I cut you off.
Well, I just want to throw one more thing in here before you wrap us up, is to say that I haven't read Truth and Method and the idea of good prejudice. But there is a bad prejudice. And I wonder, Cameron, and this could be a whole episode, but it's something for us to think about. That what I would see is a bad prejudice is a prejudice toward the humans that have lived before us, or
Mhm.
kind of what
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis would call a chronological snobbery of saying that one of the default assumptions that you need to decide whether or not you believe, Christian or atheist alike, is, are we actually smarter than all of the humans that have lived before us?
Extremely
And,
important question. Yep.
and so I think that is there could be a naive, yeah, were there people in the past who believed, that the sun went around the earth? Sure, okay, um, but
But
it
do
would be a misnomer, I think, to say that human nature has been categorically improved rapidly through technology over the last 50 years. And therefore, the moral and psychological impulses and intellectual curiosities and developments of what it means to be human and the
Mhm.
whole rest of everything that flows down from that is bunk. And we alone stand at a spot where we can dismiss the entirety of the thinking of the global past, and we've got it right. And so when people say, it's arrogant to say you believe in God, that punch doesn't land if you put it in that framework of I think you're basically going to have people who say there's a there are things that are common to the heart of humanity that are common to the heart of humanity throughout time, and that true religion addresses those non-changing commonalities. Or you say everything is in rapid flux and where the angels of our better nature have flourished and killed off all of the peasant pontifications of the past, like the alliteration there. And
Nice.
but I think those are the two default positions, Cameron, that maybe we're
Yep.
wrestling with. But if we can isolate the fact that, be honest about the way we're using faith and doubt, be honest about the prejudices that we have about human nature, human development, human rationality, human reason, and see the gifts and the beauties that come from scripture says, love the Lord your God with your mind. I mean, it's in there. So it's not punt on this play because we don't know what to do. It's to say, let's understand that that is a constellation of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that we are complex beings, and part of all that we are in the way in which we've been created is a not just a beautiful way, but a fun way to live as being intellectually curious, which is going to mean doubting a whole lot of silly things in the world around us, but then also being willing to put in the work to say, are there things that are true, that are worth holding to? Is God actually good? And can I trust him and his way for the future in all things? It's a far more robust reality than most people recognize. And I hope that even as a Christian listening to, if you're a Christian listening to this, recognize that Christ is more real than you think, and the gospel is more true than you know. You don't, we don't understand the depths of it. And that's not to say that we don't know that it's just that it is bigger than and is better than we can conceptualize even now. And so there's always more for us. And so there's no room for complacency here. We have to continue to lean into it. And I think when we lean into it and we recognize the beauty that's there, the natural byproduct of that is worship. And worship is really something that you can't help when you see something beautiful. So call it what you want, faith or constructive doubt, but ultimately it ends for the vast majority of human experience in a delight in something bigger than ourselves, and then leaning into that with the meaning of our lives.
You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.